Welcome to the Skeptic's Guide to Investing with Steve Davenport and Clem Miller. Every 2 weeks, Steve and Clem bring you brief investment insights you may not find anywhere else. We hope you enjoy today's episode. Here are Steve and Clem.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Skeptic's Guide to Investing. Today, we're having an interesting interview and discussion with Megan Smith. Megan and I are connected through Providence College. She's a board member at Providence. I went to Providence, and Megan has a lot of experience in the financial service industry her whole career. And I just thought it would be interesting to look at what's happening in this space, particularly alternatives, with somebody who was, deeply involved in how alternatives fit in various clients and various situations. So I think there's a lot to talk about, but one of the things that we've been trying to do is to focus on how women view investments and how women view the ability to make better choices and better outcomes in their life with finance. I think there's a lot of clouds hanging around women in investing, and I think we need to clear them out and try to make it clearer what you should do and how you should do it. So as part of our goal in Skeptics to improve, the overall wellness of individuals, we'd like to focus on women and how we make that wellness more successful for them as well as everyone else. So I guess I'd love to hear, Megan, kind of tell me a little bit about where you come from in terms of growing up around the ideas of money and then going to work and working in the financial industry, and just give us a little bit of the Megan Smith 101 so that we can dive into more topics.
Perfect. Thanks, Steve. I appreciate it. I actually grew up the oldest of 5 children in Worcester, Massachusetts. I would say that around the dinner table, we weren't talking about finances. There was a big age gap between the oldest and the youngest. It was hard at the dinner table to come up with conversation that everyone could be involved in. I grew up in a very kind of traditional Irish Catholic family of people of that time, where my father worked, my mother stayed home and ran the house. And we didn't have a lot of money when I was younger. And my mother had a budget that she had to work within to feed us and to clothe us. And she could always do that. But she was never the one that did the investments. She was never the one that looked for how to invest or how to save or where the best mortgage rates were coming from. My dad did all of that. And so without that education, I kind of grew up and had to teach myself. So I graduated from college. Thank you for the Providence College mention there, Steve. I went to New York and started working in the marketing department of what was the former Dean Witter Reynolds, which is now was purchased by Morgan Stanley. And I worked in the marketing department, and I learned a lot. But what I learned very quickly was, if you wanted to make any money in financial services, you had to be on the revenue generating side of the business. So you needed to be on the sales side. So I got myself therefore involved in a sales role that was account management, product development. And I've done that with mutual funds, variable annuities, and probably for the last 20 years in my career in the alternative investment field, developing product, bringing it to market, presenting it, dealing with regulators and custodians, as well as educating sales forces and home offices. All of the products that I represented were sold through a financial intermediary.
Yeah, I mean, I think that background seems awesome for what's going on today. I mean, you must feel like all of these discussions about alternatives and adding them to 401ks and what's happening with crypto and what's happening with the markets. I mean, this has been a year of quite a bit of change. And I guess I feel as though, women in general, because of the pay differential, because of disruption in career, because of a lot of things, extra, a longer lifespan means you're going to have a longer retirement, but that means you're funding a longer retirement. So, I mean, how do you feel about the gender gap? And is it something that, this podcast, like, what do you think we need to do as individuals to help others who are not in the finance industry get better results and avoid some of the gender gaps?
It's interesting you say that. Women tend to start investing later and invest less because they carry more fear. So to your point, as they're living longer, they end up having less money to live on in retirement. What's really interesting, though, is a third of women see themselves as investors, with the majority of them saving consistently. So a third of women save money consistently. And interestingly enough, as compared to their male counterparts, they tend to outperform men by about 4 basis points. So you might ask why. About women investing is they tend less to be emotional about it. They tend to be more consistent, less impulsive, and more focused on the long-term goal, which is retirement. So the issue is not necessarily capability, it's confidence in being able to do it, and then access. And how do you teach haven't been brought up or educated in the school systems how to invest with confidence and get access to it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that yesterday we had this financial literacy friend who, it's all about taking that knowledge and then doing something. And that's the big, we can deliver more knowledge to people with AI and everything else, but if it's not going to lead to action, it's going to be hard for everyone. And that's where we're trying to figure out what is the way that you can behaviorally help people so that they don't look at you as prescribing, they don't look at you as scolding, they look at you and say, hey, he's trying to help me understand the perspective and give me a good long-term result.
Yep.
What do
And
you
I think,
want?
yeah, Steve, I think the best way to do that is start them young and
Yep.
get them into the habit of investing in their 401k. I will say that was one thing that my dad did for me when I first started in my career. He said to me, put as much money away in your 401k plan as they will allow you with the company match. And what he said, I'm like, yeah, but I need that money for my rent, or I need that money to go out on a Saturday night. He's like, you'll never see the money, therefore you don't need it. So begin investing when you're young. And if $5 or $10, that will compound into a decent amount of to a decent nest egg when you retirement, I should say. I think that investing is more, you don't need to be a math guru. Investing is more about patience and consistency than it is about money crunching.
That's great. Thank you. Clem?
Megan, if you had to look around and identify which, women investors, like sort of more famous women investors, uh, women who are younger, should model themselves after, who would you recommend, and why would you recommend them?
That's an interesting one. So I would actually, and it's going to be someone that not everyone knows. There was a female investor and female advisor that I worked with at a large broker dealer that I worked with. She was a really interesting woman. She ran her own business. She had a husband and 2 kids. She ran an investing business. She had probably 30 people that worked for her. And then as she got older and her condo in the city was paid off and her children were launching and educated, um, and she was still working full time, she and her husband had the ability, because of her investing and understanding the markets and going out and educating other people on the markets and educating the people that worked for her on the best thing to do. She and her husband were actually able to buy a lavender farm in Michigan.
We'll be right back.
We hope you're enjoying our episodes. If you are, then we'd greatly appreciate your liking, following, and sharing. Help us help others. Now let's get back to the discussion.
Nice. And when we think about some of the people and women, what do you think are some of the myths that are holding back women? Do you think it's a reality? I mean, I agree with you that in returns, I think women are more balanced and probably more likely to follow along. Um,
I think there's
But
a lot of myths that hold back women, someone else to do, and they did I lose you
yeah, a
guys?
little bit. It seems like you
Okay.
might have been, maybe we just go with no video and we'll try that, see if it gives us a better recording.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Great.
What do you think, Clem?
Yeah, sure. I'll turn off my video.
So anyway, I think that the myths about women are very, I find the whole education and the system is not really clear about, women tend to perform very well in the earlier grades, and then somewhere around middle school, things get a little more difficult, and boys become more aggressive, and it just seems like there's the things that we need to do, like you said, need to start earlier. I think
Mhm.
that's the key.
Yes, and education, Steve.
Yeah. So it's really as you mentioned about trying to start earlier and get better returns through your results.
And the
Um,
interesting thing, Steve, is as we start to see more women working full time, as we start to see kind of some of the gender gaps start to balance out, women control about 32% of all global wealth. And that number is projected to sharply rise, especially as wealth transfer from older generations moves.
yeah, I agree. It's there's a lot of things that are going to happen in the next 20 years,
Yeah, and it's
and I
across
think
all
that
different types of assets, different types of asset classes, and as this generation starts to leave us, there's going to be a lot of wealth transfer that's going to go into the hands of women.
yep.
That
Um,
raises Megan, that raises an interesting question. Um, so you said 32% worldwide. Obviously, I would imagine there are big differences worldwide.
Mhm.
Um, I'm gonna guess that Europe is much more advanced in terms of women holding wealth. Well, what do you observe in Europe that you wouldn't observe here in the US or elsewhere?
It's interesting you asked that, Clem. Europe is just it's so very different than the US. What's interesting about Europe is they tend not to talk about wealth as much, but they tend to educate more. So the things in Europe that are kind of quiet and not talked about as much, investing, wealth, money, whereas in the US, we talk more about that and we show more wealth, but we don't talk about things like sexual behaviors and things of that nature that are much more politicized in Europe. I think that Europe has just done a really at not broadcasting, but of educating and giving women the confidence that they can actually succeed in this.
Mhm. Do when you look at women versus men, do you observe that women invest differently? Like, do they sort of focus more on some asset classes rather than on other asset classes, for example? Or
Yeah,
are there
so
behaviors that are different?
there are behaviors that are different. As I mentioned earlier, they tend to be more consistent and less reactive to the market. So therefore, they tend to weather storms better than their male counterparts. Millennial women, which is interesting, are more likely than some of the older generations to invest in alternative products than millennial men are.
Really?
Yes.
Why is that?
They believe they have a better education. They talk more about crypto. They've learned more about options and futures in college or graduate school classes, and they believe they know more.
I hear the believe they know more as part of that. Um,
But it's interesting, Clem. The stats I have are for millennials. 24% of them will invest in alternatives. For Gen X's, it's 20%, and for boomers, it's only 8.
right.
Now, that could also mean that many alternative asset classes are illiquid. So it would not be smart for a boomer to be investing in alternatives as a new asset class.
Yeah,
For millennials and Gen Xers, it would be a little bit more mainstream.
right. So so let's jump into alts for a bit.
Sure.
Um, so you have obviously there's been a big push, and I treat alts very differently than crypto, by the way. I treat crypto as, I mean, my own view is crypto isn't really an asset class, but
Right.
very speculative. Um, I don't want to call it asset or even investment. It's gambling essentially. In
Yeah,
my
I agree. I do agree with you with that one. When I think of alternatives, I think of things like real estate, private equity, private
Right.
debt, credit. I throw maybe some VC in there and maybe a little bit of something like a tangible item like artwork,
Right, right,
art collections.
yeah,
Yeah, I think that the art is part of the problem though, right? Because you look at art and you look at crypto and you say it's an asset that has a place, but is it an investment? And I look at art and I think of it as an investment, but I still have trouble thinking about crypto the same way. Because I
So
view that you can absorb a benefit from having art hanging in your house. You enjoy it all the time. Whereas crypto, I'm not sure what the enjoyment level is, or I don't know the benefit of crypto, I guess is my.
So I would agree with you on that, Steve. I kind of put art in the same asset class as I would put real estate in. It's something that you can use and enjoy, but it's nothing that you want to have to sell. Because if you have to sell it for a reason,
yeah.
not you're going to get what the market's offering on that particular time. Versus if you're not emotional about it or you don't use it to need something, you can actually trade it when the market will give you the best price.
Right. Well, I look at things like collectibles and art and think, they have a much longer time frame. So if you're
Mhm.
going to invest in these, you have to be willing to wait because the
Right.
transaction costs are so high.
Correct.
And
And
that's
that's what I
kind of like real estate. I still can't believe we're talking about a 6%, commission. And maybe it's starting to change with the new laws around realty, but it still is such a transaction cost where the market has no transaction costs now.
Mhm.
It feels like these other areas I would have thought would be going down the curve and would be at 3 or 4% with real estate and would be, and lower commissions for the art space. I mean, I bought some art online and it's interesting how, how it's priced and how you maintain it and how much commission there is in storage and transaction costs.
Yep. No, I
So,
agree with that. I agree with that. I
Ma-
do start to see some of the commissions coming down, but to your point, Steve, they're nowhere near where they should be, compared to other asset classes.
so Megan, obviously one of the downsides or the downside of alts is liquidity.
Correct.
And while younger people can probably stand to have a little bit more illiquidity in their portfolios, it's still an issue. And younger people do have uh, occasional needs for liquidity, so it's not something they can completely ignore. So, my question is, why, if there are, private credit, private equity, private, other things that are being issued out of Blackstone or Apollo or Ares or whatnot, why wouldn't you just, why wouldn't a young investor just buy those stocks? Buy Blackstone, buy Ares, buy Apollo. Just buy that because it's liquid.
Buy the firm stock you mean versus buy
Buy,
an alternative
buy,
stock?
buy the firms. Why
Yeah.
not?
Well, I think what you see is with like many things, higher risk becomes a potential for higher rewards. So over the long term, if you see what alternatives look like, again, over the long term, this isn't for immediate investing. If you need money immediately, buy the stock of the company. But if you're long-term investing for your retirement funding, which is something you're not supposed to touch until you're over 65, then put some alternatives in there. Not a lot, enough, I don't know what the right number is for the right person. A lot of asset allocation models show 20% for the millennials and the Gen X ages. And then they can weather out the storm if there's some bumps in the roads. And when there are bumps, there are going to be big valleys and big peaks. but over the long term, it will return and add to their retirement funding. If they need money to buy a house, that's not money that should be invested in alternatives. Absolutely not.
When you look at alternatives, and I've seen this throughout my career, is that things that used to be for investors of 5 million or up or 20 million and up have now come down to investors that are $2 million and up.
Mhm.
And I think it's the democratization of the markets. Do you feel that democratization and going down to lower and lower client levels in terms of sophistication, or just in general the ability to lose money? I mean, do you think the endowment model really transfers to the individual, or is it something that the industry is telling us is good, and that actually more individuals are not a lot like endowments because they don't have such a long horizon? They have, this Friday when I get paid is what they're looking forward to.
Correct. So, Steve, I'll answer that in a couple different ways. One is endowments invest 30% or more on average. Big endowments invest 30% or more into alternatives. That is probably too much for an individual investor to be able to handle. I don't think an individual investor is like an endowment. Not only does an endowment have a much longer time horizon, they typically are so well funded that they don't need a lot of cash out of that. So the cash funding that they're getting from their other 70% of their investments is more than enough for what they need. Individuals are not like that. They need money for today. They don't need money that's more than just their paycheck on a Friday afternoon. So I don't think that they should model after an endowment. I do believe that the younger generation, and even to some degree my generation, should include some alternatives in their long-term investing, but not as much as what an endowment adds.
Right. I've seen people, and Clem will remember this at M&T, that they think about private equity and think about taking it out of your equity allocation, and think about private real estate and taking that out of your public real estate allocation, so that the amount of actual real estate, and I think the most exciting thing happened is in the fixed space, because I think the private credits, where interest rates are so low, relatively speaking to history, whether we're at 2 or 4%, it's still, I'd say in a lower bound. Do we, does the benefits of private credit are rewarded by the extra return, or do you think it's an appropriate mix? You're getting a higher return, but you're taking a higher risk.
Correct. I think it is the right balance, the higher risk with higher return. However, I keep wanting to focus on time horizon. Their time horizon has to be long. This can't be for an immediate investment. You've got to be looking at it over the long term. So, Steve, when you get your paycheck or you get your monthly statement from wherever you invest, when you look at the alternative one, you can't be saying, well, that didn't go up as much and the higher percentages as everything else did, because it's not going to if you're looking at on a month or quarter to quarter basis. You've got to look at it on, I'd say more than an annual basis.
No, I agree. It takes a different perspective in order for you to benefit, because you've got to be patient.
And you have
I
to make
guess
sure the person is educated enough to know that this is a patient run.
I think, I mean, do you want to talk a little bit about crowdfunding and some of the things that are going on? Because I think I looked at some of these real estate and farm investments where you can, you know, own or lease a piece of land, and the farmers basically produce something on the land, and then it's like owning a farm, but you don't have any of the manure. Um, do you think these investments? I looked at them and said, boy, there could be nothing less correlated to AI than this piece of bean farm in North Dakota.
Correct.
And I don't know. I think it's kind of exciting that we have all these choices, and people who do the loans, and they say, I need $4,000 and I'll pay you 10%, and it's I just think
in
that it really has, the internet and the use of these different vehicles has really created a very unique opportunity where, it used to be you had to buy IBM or GE, and now you can buy pieces of land, pieces of housing, pieces of everything. And it almost seems like we've become, the Amazon of financial services with all these different choices.
What's interesting, Steve, is, you said going back to, what did you say? Was it AT&T and IBM you said, which
Yeah.
is now probably, the FANG companies. It's Facebook, Apple, Netflix, Google. Um, and I think those have a right place in everyone's portfolio because they are what we don't call blue chip stocks. I haven't heard that term in a while. But these crowdfundings and things like that, I think are for really only for high net worth people who can afford to take that risk and afford to take that loss if it happens. I don't believe they're for the everyday investor.
Yeah, I just remember my uncle used to come home from the post office and he'd meet my father and they'd sit there and have a cup of tea and some cookies and they'd debate whether GE was better than IBM. And, they were these classic kind of, well, I don't know, that GE leader, that guy, he really knows how to manage the balance sheet. And, they would all watch, William Rukeyser on Friday night.
I
And
love it.
I just think that money and culture have changed so much, right? I mean, it used to be something you talked about, once a week. And, my father wanted to be up to date. So he was reading his journal on the tee on the way to work. And it was like, hey, did you see this article? And I think about the way information is transmitted, instantaneously around the world. And immediately something happens in Taiwan and we know about it in, a matter of minutes.
Yeah.
It just feels like it used to be a much more of a culture where you thought about these things and you did these things, there was much greater ceremony and pomp around, I made an investment today. I remember when I was caddying and I made my first investment in Unical and they had this thing called shale that they thought was going to eventually be pretty big. And I was invested in it 20 years before shale became, and I didn't do particularly well, but it was a concept that these people kept talking about. And I was like, well, I get the long horizon. I can invest in this. As a reality, I needed a new bike and my investment in Unical went south.
You learned a very
So,
valuable lesson at a very young age.
right.
Megan, if I might, let me, on the alternative issue still, but focusing on the whole 40, the sort of newish 401k aspect of this whole kind of push by the alts companies, the alts providers and the greater acceptance by regulators of putting alts into 401ks. I'm sort of wondering what you think about that. And I have a specific question, which is, the when companies make 401ks available to their employees, they put together lists, right, of potential investments. And while it's ultimately up to the employees to select from those lists, if there are any quote bad quote investments that show up on these lists, judged from an ex post perspective in terms of performance, those companies can get sued and do get sued. And so, what's the tension there? Are we really going to see that much use of alts and 401ks because of that litigation risk? Or are we going to see greater adoption as, regulators push, as the alts companies push? Is somebody going to offer litigation protection, or, I mean, how is this all going to work?
I don't think you're going to see anyone offer litigation protection.
Yeah.
And I think you are going to see an increase. You are going to see an increase in alts just because we're going from zero. So of course it's going to increase. I think the question more is how much is it going to increase? And I go back to education, and those 401k providers need to put a cap on how much people can invest in alternatives. And I haven't read anything that says that their plans are capping that and they need to be capped. Everyone obviously doesn't need to be capped at the same number, but based on people's outcomes and what people's financial literacy, financial needs look like, there needs to be some sort of a cap on how much money they can invest in alternatives.
And
But isn't this kind of like what happened with the company stock, where we had, it made sense to say you shouldn't own more than 50% in company stock, but people working there felt, hey, I know this thing better than I know anything else in my life, so I'm going to put it all in, and then eventually they had to take it away because there wasn't the ability to cap, I don't think, in 401ks. And it feels to me like if you add more risk, the people who are more desperate are going to be taking that risk
Yes.
as much as they can because they've fallen behind because of other circumstances in their life. And it feels like it's a button you're going to press if you get desperate.
The other thing that it comes back, another thing we've talked a lot about education at different ages and different types of investments at different ages. The one thing that we haven't talked about is the power of the investment advisor. And if someone has a financial advisor that is assisting them with this, that will also help kind of, it's not perfect, but it will help make the peaks not as high and the lows not as low and make it a little bit more consistent.
do you think that more young people have investment advisors today than they used to do in the past? I mean, do you think there's greater acceptance of investment advisory, or are people doing it DIY more?
Clem, I tend to think that people are doing DIY more. And simply put, because it's cheaper and these young people think that they know a lot.
Yeah.
I think when you look at older people, I don't want to put a specific age out there, but when you
You're
look,
not talking about us, are you?
no, we're talking
You're
about
talking about real old people, right?
yeah, or I'm not talking about kids right out of college. You say to yourself, okay, maybe it's time that now I have a little bit of a nest egg. I've done okay on my own. Now I need some help and some advice, and I need somebody to help me with this because I'm not fully trained to do it.
No, I think that's a great point. And the other part about alternatives that we haven't really delved into, but I'm very interested in, is this idea of, investing for your values or investing for your principles. We have a strategy about that's aligned with what the U.S. Catholic bishops think are socially responsible investing. And we pick from that universe so that we know that whatever portfolio we build will have, the right values or the right principles underlying it. How do you feel about values-based investing? Do you do any yourself? And what do you think for people who, I like it because I believe that if you're investing in something that you believe in value-wise, you're less likely to be a seller at the wrong time. If you're behind a company and you think they do things right in terms of charitable contributions or other impact to their employees or community, I think you feel better about them, and you're going to be a better investor, and therefore you're going to have better returns. Is it really that simple?
Steve, I do agree with you. But remember that when you're investing that way, you're investing with your heart, not necessarily your head. So my gut would tell me that you invest that way, but invest very carefully and very limited. You will probably weather a storm better because you won't have the emotion, you'll have the emotional commitment to stay there, but it shouldn't be the largest asset in your portfolio.
Yeah, well, I mean, the beta of the portfolio is still 0.98 or what, it still has a lot of good names, and a lot don't get, it doesn't own the military, the Raytheons and the others, and it doesn't own some of the weapons, and it doesn't own some healthcare. But I guess I'm just saying, do you find that yourself you gravitate towards I don't know if you've heard of the State Street ETF that goes and tries to find companies that treat women better in terms of their management team and how many women on the boards. I mean, I kind of think those things, I thought they would be more popular with women in general, with more popular with people wanting to be values based.
I actually do not invest that way personally.
Okay. And do you think it's a return thing, or you just find yourself more attached to to being, around things that you understand more?
I would say it's twofold, Steve. I look at it as being a little bit more of a riskier investment because you're investing more with your heart than you are your head. And my more riskier investments in my personal portfolio are more alternative driven. I don't put any more in there because it's just, in my opinion, going to increase the risk in the portfolio.
Okay.
Yeah, in a sense, you've chosen where to put your risk.
And I put my risk in alternatives.
Right, exactly. Whereas some people might choose to put their risk in more value areas, in values-driven areas.
It's as is all of investing, it's a personal decision.
Right.
Right. And when you think about your career and where you are now, um, what would you say to people who are getting started in terms of, if your prescription to somebody who's younger and trying to start off and figure this out? Are there things that they should, some guidelines they should follow in terms of how to get started?
Yeah, I think it depends on different age groups. I did find some stats for this that women typically don't start investing until they're 27 years old, which I think is too late. They've missed 5 years of that money compounding. I think you should start as soon as you graduate from college and put something away, as my father did teach me that. I think you need to kind of look at what your overall goals are going to be, both short term and long term. So, do you want to buy a house? If you want to buy a house, you need to be invested in more liquid assets. If you're investing more for retirement, you can do some of these more riskier investments that we've talked about that have a more long term time horizon. I think that the investors should pick what type of platform they want to invest through. So do they go to a place like Fidelity or Vanguard, or do they go to a trusted financial advisor that's a person that can help them understands their needs and goals and then execute on them? For the younger generation, I would say start small, but maximize everything that you can. If you've got a Roth, maximize it. If you've got a 401k, maximize it. If you've got an employee stock purchase plan, maximize it. Because you'll never miss the money that comes out of your paycheck. You've never seen it. And then I would also encourage people to have what I call a thirst for knowledge and educate yourself, whether it's online articles, whether it's podcasts like this, whether it's getting a subscription to Barron's. Do something that help educate yourself so that you understand what's going on and you can take an active role in managing your future.
No, I think that's great. That was a great advice. When we talk about investments, we're trying to expand the concept a little bit into how you invest your time and how do you invest in things in the community that help. And I know that you're committed to PC being a trustee, and Providence College has been very good to a lot of people, and I think it's a great place to make an investment. But can you just talk to me about personally how you feel about giving back in your time or treasure, and just what it means to you in terms of, is this investment as important as some of the other ones you're making?
I think for a well-balanced person, you need to invest in more than just money, right? I think you have to invest in people. Think you have to invest in your community. I am very involved in the Melanoma Foundation, a not-for-profit called Impact Melanoma. I have sat on that board, and I was actually the clerk of that board for a little while. I timed off the board. My husband passed of melanoma when he was 45 years old. So I have a very personal connection there and want to help educate people on the importance of sunscreen, shade, all of that. So that's kind of a little bit more of a personal connection. And it started very small. This started very small in Boston, is now it's got tethers out to other areas. So that's one thing. Another thing I'm looking into, Steve, is giving back in a active way with a committee in a board in Boston that raises money and coordinates the Archdiocese of Boston's priests in their retirement funding in their retirement home, and how those priests are taken care of once they're out of the diocesan churches.
Wow.
So,
Those are great. I'm sorry to hear about your husband.
Yeah.
thank you. But I do try to, all of those hit me at a different place from my personal experiences. And I think that's very important. You've got to, if you're going, in my opinion, if you're going to do something that you're not being paid for, it's coming out of the goodness of your heart, it has to be something that's in your heart and something that's very important to you.
Yeah, I would love to get those links and share them with our listeners. Because part of what one of the advisors we had last week was, talking about he's graduating from West Point and wanted to support vets. And I think that we all look at advisors and we say, oh, let's look at their returns, or let's look at what what they're doing, or how many people they have on staff. And I think that looking at it, individuals, and thinking about, gee, there are complex people who have done a lot of good things and are trying to help others, not just in the world of finance that they're familiar, but also in these other worlds and these other orbs, right?
My father always taught me, to which much is given, much is expected. So,
Yep, I've heard that a few times.
and he lived it, and he taught all of us that as well.
Clem, do you have any final questions?
No, I think I've covered all my questions. Thank you very much, Megan.
Thank you both for your time today. I appreciate it. This is fun.
Sure, we appreciate having you, and we'd love to continue the story and hear some more about some of those charities, maybe going forward. So, everybody, thank you for listening, and I think today's podcast brought up a lot of topics and really did a good job of covering them. So, I thank Clem and Megan, and I hope everybody has a great Labor Day weekend, and I hope everybody continues, as Megan says, to find that quench for knowledge so they can also satisfy some of their passions. Be good, everyone.
The views shared on this podcast represent the personal investment views of the hosts. They are for educational purposes and not meant to be taken as investment advice. Listeners should consult their own investment, legal, and tax advisors. Past performance of any investments is not a guarantee for future return.